Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our fourth FPCI Ambassadorial Lecture in cooperation with the Delegation of the European Union to Indonesia. FPCI is proud to host this series, in which today we have here with us His Excellency Ambassador Igor Driesmans, Ambassador of the European Union to Asean. Welcome, Ambassador. Throughout this past month, we've had 3 of our ambassadorial lectures in Jakarta, Malang, and Yogyakarta, and today we are joined by students from West Java, namely Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani, Universitas Pajajaran, and Universitas Katolik Parayangan. Welcome everybody, and thank you to our FPCI chapters for tuning in. I believe it's such a rare opportunity for there to be a platform that is able to bridge the gap between students and ambassadors, so I'm certain that we'll have a very interesting and insightful discussion today. My name is Cindy, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, this ambassadorial lecture series aims to discuss various aspects of the bilateral relations between Indonesia and the European Union, especially during the unprecedented time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, our topic of discussion will be the future of regionalism and multilateralism. So don't forget to share your moments with us from this dialogue by tagging at FPC Indo and at uni_Eropa on your social media posts. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin today's discussion. So may I invite His Excellency Ambassador Igor Driesmans. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to join all of you today in these special times. I hope that one day we can meet in person, or that I can come to your respective universities to give a lecture or to have a talk or a chat. But awaiting that, we will do it virtually. And thanks for the opportunity to speak about the very topical issue of multilateralism and regionalism in today's strange times. I prepared a small PowerPoint, which I will try to use. Here we go. I hope you can all see that. And I'll try really to be short, so that we can have a full discussion rather than a lecture from my side. There we go. Okay. So what I thought I'd do is not to give you an academic lecture about different theories of regionalism and multilateralism. I'm sure you have enough of that in your studies and in your academic papers, but rather to give you the view of a practitioner, a diplomat posted here in Jakarta, Indonesia. And more specifically, to talk to you about how the pursuit of multilateralism and regionalism is really at the core of the EU's policy at large, and of EU's foreign policy in particular. And what I'd like to get at is that basically our foreign policy is based on 2 premises, 2 big principles. One is that we need global rules and global institutions to ensure that everybody plays by the same rules, and that there are no free riders. For us, that's the only way to ensure global security and global prosperity. And the alternative really is the law of the jungle. So that's what I would, in a very basic way, define as multilateralism. The second point, the second premise of our policy, both domestically but also in terms of foreign policy, is that our feeling is that in today's globalized world, we are more prosperous and more secure if we work together as a number of countries. And that's true for your own region. It's more protected, more secure, more prosperous, but also for the wider world, as we'll try to see today. So I'd structure what I say my presentation in two parts. One is more of a quick recap of EU as such, EU institutions, EU history a little bit, as well as EU foreign policy. And then secondly, we can look at how these principles of multilateralism and regionalism are put in practice here in the world, of course, but also here in ASEAN and here in Jakarta, Indonesia. So, firstly, a quick recap, as I said, of European Union, what it is and what it stands for and what its history is. The paper you see here is a paper written by Robert Schumann and published on the 9th of May 1950. So basically, it's called the Robert Schumann Declaration after the French foreign minister who issued this declaration. So basically 5 years after World War II, he called on other countries in Europe, and foremost he called on Germany, whom you will recall they've just gotten out of the war with, to take steps towards integrating themselves towards further European integration. There's a small quote here. Of course, you can't read what's on that screen, but one of the things he said is that Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. So his point was that we should not start with grand plans, but rather build European integration bit by bit, brick by brick. And the first brick of integration was the union for steel and coal production, which were put under a single authority of what later became the European Commission. And since that declaration, which he made 5 years after World War II, Europe has been making every time a few more steps in towards deeper integration. 7 months after that declaration by Robert Schuman, the European Economic Community was created through the Treaty of Rome. In 1992, another big step was taken with the so-called Maastricht Treaty, establishing and maintaining a single market that guaranteed 4 basic freedoms within that market: the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. In 1999, the monetary union was created with the creation of a single currency, the euro. And in 2007, yet another big step with the signing of the Treaty of Lisbon. And that treaty had a number of innovations. One of them was an even more powerful European Parliament, a new legal personality for the European Union, and the creation of new institutions, so to speak, with the creation of a long-term presidential post of the European Council. That's the meeting of the leaders of the European Union, heads of state and government, and the creation of a post of High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy. We'll come back to that. And for the first time also, the treaty gave member states the explicit legal right to leave the European Union and established a procedure to do so a procedure which, since you will know, has been triggered by the United Kingdom. Now, my point is that this integration has been a continuous process with ups and sometimes also downs, but that's a procedure or a process that is still going on. And you might have seen the images of the latest European summit, when another big step towards more integration was taken, when the so-called recovery fund for post-COVID economic recovery was adopted. And what's so special with this fund is that it will allow this 750 billion euro fund. And what's so special about it is that it will allow the European Commission to borrow on the markets and basically create for the first time also a European Union debt that is, of course, to be repaid, but it's another step towards increased federalism at the European level. So, briefly, these are the three of the institutions. There's more, like the Court of Justice, but these are the three who make up kind of a triangle, with the European Commission, who's basically there to represent the European Union interest, and who has some special powers. One of them is the right of initiative, and that's an exclusive right to propose European Union law. So legislation on any topic departs from the European Commission with a proposal, which subsequently have to be agreed by the Council of the European Union, that is the 27 ministers representing the member states, and the European Parliament, who are directly elected by the European citizens. So also for the European budget, every 7 years we need a new European budget that is proposed by the European Commission and then adopted by both chambers. Now, interestingly, the Council of Ministers now is basically legislating and deciding on by qualified majority in most areas, and the Treaty of Lisbon moved another 45 policy areas to qualified majority voting. That means that not a single member state can actually block a piece of legislation or a decision on its own. And of course, these are two very big differences with what you have here in Southeast Asia with ASEAN. Two differences in that ASEAN is intergovernmental, so there's no say policy drivers such as we have in Europe with the European Commission, firstly, and secondly, as you know, it works totally by a consensus, so there's no qualified majority as such. Quickly, so you know whom we're talking about in terms of our leadership, Belgian President of the European Council, that new function that was created with the Treaty of Lisbon, German former Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen leads the European Commission. David Sassoli is the President of the European Parliament, and Josep Borrell is the High Representative for the EU's foreign policy and security policy, and also Vice President of the European Commission. This is a function that was created with the Treaty of Lisbon, whereby basically a number of functions were merged, because it was seen in basically the working of the European institutions up until then that there was some incoherence in the way the institutions were working. And this function was therefore created because this person is both Vice President of the European Commission, so sits in that body as a European Commission Vice President, but at the same time he chairs the meeting of the Council of Ministers, and notably of the foreign ministers, but also what is maybe less known, of defense ministers. And on top of that, he is the head of the European Defense Agency. So all these different functions together make that that function of High Representative and Vice President was aimed to be a very powerful function internally, but also the one who would defend and speak in name of the European Union abroad. He is supported in this by a new service that was created, founded in January 2011. It was responsible for 144 offices and what we call delegations, basically European Union embassies, and composed of both European Union officials, permanent officials, but also of a certain number of member states diplomats who serve normally for Poland or Germany or Italy. They come temporarily for 4 or 8 years or a little more to work in this European External Action Service and contribute with their knowledge and skills of diplomacy. And of course, the idea is that the creation of this service creates also more coherence within European Union foreign policy between the institutions, the member states, and the member states amongst them. This is a picture, I think, of 2 years ago with the former High Representative Federica Mogherini and the heads of the delegation, the ambassadors. You will see there is almost gender parity, and it is a quite substantial service with over 4,000 people working for it. Last point on this, abroad, I briefly mentioned that abroad the European Union is represented by the European Union delegation, so-called, as I said, embassies. My colleague, Ambassador Pickett, probably spoke about this as well. We're there to represent the European Union and the policies of the European Union. We're also here to coordinate with EU member states locally at ambassadorial level or at the level of the different councillors. We're also here to manage development projects, but of course, first and foremost, to build partnership with, in this case, the European, Indonesia, or more broadly, the regional organization of Asean, and therefore the representation falls upon the delegations. So that was just a quick introduction to the European Union institutions, its history, and its foreign policy. I thought it was important to just browse through that before I speak to you about the role of the multilateralism and regionalism in our foreign policy, and look specifically at ASEAN. And again, for me, the 2 main points I'd like to hammer home today is that the two principles on which we stand are indeed that of multilateralism and regionalism. If you look at what our foreign policy is, you see here interests and values. Of course, we as European Union promote both, but I'd like to focus especially on these three examples of interests which we are promoting abroad with our partners: trade, security, and climate. Of course, there's many more, but I'd like to just stop at these three and explain the role of multilateralism and regionalism in going about the promotion of those interests. If you look at the first one, which is trade, the basic standpoint is the one I set out before. That is, we need global rules and institutions to ensure that everybody plays by the same rules. And in the area of trade, that is the World Trade Organization. And our objectives at the WTO are to basically keep the world's trading system fair, predictable, and based on those common rules. And we want everybody to abide by them, to follow the common WTO rules. And that means, if need be, that there is a dispute settlement system, that if one country or the other does not follow the rules, that one country can take them to that court, and that court decides, and that subsequently the one who loses the court case or the panel actually abides by it. And that's a very principle of the way the multilateral system, in this case the World Trade System, should work. And you will see here that the European Union is represented not only individually, but also by the individual countries, but also by the European Union as such in the WTO. Of course, there's other objectives to our participation in the WTO. We wanted to bring developing countries into its decision making and into the global economy, and we want also to reinforce WTO's support for sustainable trade policies. But the very basis of it is really to ensure that there is a fair and level playing ground of rules that everybody has to abide by. Now, if we look at the level below, which is the regional level, we support different, probably by the very virtue of whom we are as a regional organization ourselves, we do support the creation and the development of regional organizations across the world. Now, this is a slide of it's slightly outdated. It's from last year, but it shows you that also in our trade relations, that we often seek to establish a link between the European Union and different regional groupings as such. One example of this is in Latin America, the Mercosur, with whom we've reached an agreement for an ambitious, balanced and comprehensive trade agreement last year. But you also see that in Africa, West Africa or Southern Africa, with the SADC region, again, with whom we aim to reach regional agreements, region-to-region agreements, in order to not just to help the trade flow between the EU and those regions, but also to help them building further a common market and to strengthen their regional organization. Now, if we look at a bit closer to here, what that means for our engagement with ASEAN, We have basically two tracks, and the most important one at this stage is bilateral. We have concluded free trade agreements with Singapore and Vietnam. Both have now entered into force. The FTA with Vietnam was concluded and signed in 2018, but entered into force only now on the 1st of August after ratification by the different parliaments. So two FTAs with the ASEAN region already in force, and negotiations ongoing with a number of them, including with Indonesia. But a point I'd like to make is that we see this very much as building blocks towards what is our ultimate goal, that is to have a region-to-region agreement between the European Union and ASEAN as a bloc. Now, for that to happen, we are also working with ASEAN to support further its regional economic integration and to help them to establish common rules, common standards, common transport and customs procedures, common monitoring and statistics capacities, intellectual property rights, etc. And this will help the economic integration of ASEAN, very much demanded as such by the ASEAN region, but will also then subsequently help us to conclude a region-to-region free trade agreement with ASEAN as a regional bloc. The program that we have designed for that is a so-called Arise Plus project, which we have both with ASEAN as a group, but which we also rolled out with individual ASEAN countries, helping them to achieve this harmonization of standards and rules. One example is the common transport system, which we hope to roll out in the course of this year. Now, that was a word about trade, and again, I tried to highlight the need for both global common rules, multilateral common rules through the World Trade Organization, but then our work with different regions. Now, we can focus on that second EU interest, which is the one of security now, and there too we work on both tiers, the multilateral, the global one, and secondly the regional one. If we take a multilateral system first and stop 1 second with looking at the example of non-proliferation. The hallmark instrument or agreement here is the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and its objective is and has been the prevention of the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, to further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and ultimately complete disarmament. Now it's a binding commitment in a multilateral treaty and entered into force in 1970 with a total of 191 states having joined that treaty, including, importantly, the 5 nuclear weapon states. And the European Union has been furthering that agenda, and the example that here I wanted to bring to your attention is the one of the Iran nuclear deal, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which took decades to work out, and is probably one of the best examples of the non-proliferation agenda in line with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was negotiated by the European Union with Iran in the so-called P5+1+EU format, and signed in July 2015, and importantly, unanimously approved by the UN Security Council. And under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to eliminate its stockpiles of medium enriched uranium and cut its stockpile of low enriched uranium by 98%, and to monitor and verify Iran's compliance with the agreement, the International Atomic Energy Agency was granted with regular access to all Iranian nuclear facilities. So again, one example of how we pursue multilateralism in the area of non-proliferation and security. Another example of security is the law of the sea. It's maybe something that in this part of the world here in ASEAN you might be more familiar with or more acquainted with. And here you will know that the kind of multilateral instrument that we have at our disposal is the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, so-called UNCLOS, which came into force in 1994. And you will see here, just like when I mentioned the WTO, that the European Union is a party to the convention, not just individually by member states, but also as a collective. Now, the law of the sea defines the convention defines the rights and responsibilities of nations with respect to their use of the world's oceans. It establishes guidelines for businesses, the environment, and the management of marine natural resources. And the convention also sets the limits of various areas measured from a carefully defined baseline. Of course, the UNCLOS is probably most known for its different arbitration cases between countries who dispute each other's maritime borders. And the one maybe most known is the case of the Philippines versus China, also known as the South China Sea arbitration, which was brought by the Republic of the Philippines against the People's Republic of China, and on which the court ruled in 2016. And again, the European Union as party to UNCLOS and somebody who subscribes to multilateralism and UNCLOS, we have argued for the implementation of and the respect of that particular award. So a multilateral, also security architecture, but I think interestingly here in Southeast Asia is also the regional security architecture. I think you are very familiar with, but let me just highlight this as basically one of the main achievements of ASEAN as a regional organization is having managed to put itself really at the core of the security architecture in the region, which is known for its say strategic rivalry between between notably the United States and China. It managed to set up this architecture around ASEAN, with ASEAN at its center, which allows ASEAN to actually set, to a large extent, the agenda. So that's the first achievement. The second achievement is that through these different meetings and groupings, it establishes permanent measures of confidence building, be it on maritime issues, be it on counterterrorism issues, be it on all kinds of security related issues. So it's an architecture which is very inclusive and allows for very frequent and regular contacts, also with countries who would normally maybe not necessarily talk to each other. So that's on security. The last EU interest which I would like to mention is the issue of climate change, which is really at the heart of the European Union agenda and priorities. And there, kind of the multilateral backbone is the so-called Paris Agreement. It's an agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, dealing with greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, adaptation, and finance, signed here, as you can see on the picture, in 2016. Well, actually, that's a picture of 2015 in Paris, but it was signed 1 year later. And as of February 2020, all members have actually signed the agreement, and except for a few notable exceptions, you can see here some of the emitters not party to it are, for example, Iran or Turkey. But again, the European Union is a member as such to this agreement, which a long-term temperature goal is to keep the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And that's to be done by reducing emissions as soon as possible, and also aims to increase the ability of the different parties to adapt to the adverse impact of climate change, which are already happening, and we can see it in front of our eyes. Now, under the Paris Agreement, each country must determine, plan, and regularly report on the contribution that it undertakes to mitigate global warming. And there is no mechanism that forces a country to set a specific emissions target by a specific date, but it's important that each target which is set goes beyond previously set targets. And as far as the European Union is concerned, we have set ourselves a very ambitious target with the so-called European Union Green Deal. And its aim is to be climate neutral in 2050, so that by 2050 there would not be any net emissions of CO2. And that's something that we are now trying to enshrine in European Union law. As the European Commission proposed a so-called European climate law to turn this political commitment into a legal obligation. You might remember I mentioned at the start the latest kind of step into European integration with the Recovery Fund post COVID. Well, I think what's interesting is that a lot of the disbursement will be linked to the implementation of the Paris commitment. For example, the financing of environmentally friendly technologies, the decarbonization of the energy sector, ensuring that buildings are more energy efficient, or the rollout of cleaner, cheaper, and healthier public and private transport. So that's kind of at the global level, the commitment, that kind of common rules that we would like everybody to abide by and that everybody signed up to. But also here we work also together with different regional groupings. And if I take again the example of ASEAN, we work with ASEAN both in terms of dialogue, in terms of exchange of experience, but also in terms of financial support. Here you see the example of our support to biodiversity, which is a key factor also in climate change, with support to the different ASEAN heritage parks and the biodiversity conservation and management of protected areas, which we financially support. Another example of our support in the area of climate change is a program we have worked out with ASEAN of support to the sustainable use of peatland and haze mitigation, which you might know is a very hot also political topic here. But we found I think very good way of working with ASEAN, combining both a governmental and non-state actor approach, so both working with different countries, most notably Indonesia and Malaysia, to work on a more sustainable use of peatland, which we know contains a lot of CO2, and when it's treated in a certain way, causes a lot of haze pollution. So we work both with government, but also with local communities, local livelihoods, to exchange experience and see how different practices can be done differently. So I think that's where I'm going to stop. I think again, what I tried to explain after having browsed through a bit of European basics, so to speak, is to show on the basis of these three examples, trade, security, and climate, how for us the basis of our policies are multilateral ones, for the reasons I set out. We need global rules to avoid that countries take advantage, that we can't afford the law of the jungle in international politics. And secondly, how we support regional organizations worldwide, but then specifically ASEAN, and I can surely share more about that should you wish so. I might just stop here and give the floor back to you, Cindy.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador. So now let's go ahead and dive into our question and answer session. Now I will be taking 3 questions per batch, which will be then answered by Ambassador Driesmans before moving on to the next batch. So in this first batch, to ask your question, you can use the raise hand feature on your Zoom app by clicking participants and then selecting the raise hand feature on the bottom right. And I will be randomly selecting from those who have raised their hands. So we have 2 questions lined up here. First, we'll take from Unpat Rahmaditya M. Putra.
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon. My name is Rahmaditya M. Putra. Hence, you can call me by my nickname Adit. First of all, in the last session, we talked about WTO policies that closely linked to the European Union. And if we look based on research, that there are several cases between Indonesia and WTO, And one that is recently happening right now is actually the EU is prohibiting the entry of Indonesian palm oil, and which is the part of palm oil dispute. And seeing this, it could be violating the WTO articles, especially Article 1 regarding most favored nation, and national treatment, excuse me, or the non-discriminatory principle. Hence, by hence to this, how does the EU will plan to do this, especially regarding the consultation to WTO itself, seeing that Indonesia and EU sometimes involved in some of the landmark disputes such as anti-dumping and also the restriction of market access for the palm oil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And for our second question from Unpad, Almas Rahmawati.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope it clears. Good afternoon, Ambassador, and all of the audience. My question, of course, first of all, my name is Almas Rahmawati Putri from Unpad. So my question will be, as we know that EU and also the ASEAN has very different principle and characteristic of the region, right? And when it comes to forming the cooperation, especially consensus and its implementation, what I would like to ask is about how is the EU mechanism compared to ASEAN, which is we know that ASEAN has, for example, no intervention principle to make sure the implementation of the cooperation or specifically the consensus itself. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Almas. And before we hand the floor back over to Ambassador Driesmans, do we have any more questions before we close the first batch? If you do, please do raise your hands now. All right, so we'll take those first two questions. I'll hand the floor back over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for those two questions. Well, firstly, on the issue of palm oil, and it is true that Indonesia has launched a case before the WTO alleging discrimination in the so-called Renewable Energies Directive 2. So on that case, also legally, I just can't speak. What I would say though is that one of the big misunderstandings is that there is an issue of market access inhibition or prevention of market access or limitation of any kind of palm oil to from Indonesia or other countries to the European Union market. Now, that is not the case. What is the case is that the Renewable Energy Directive, and it gets a bit technical, but if I try to simplify, is that in the directive, a number of criteria are established that are needed for a commodity to be qualified renewable energy, and hence a benefit from the renewable energy scheme, for example, when it comes to fiscal scheme or financing from the European Union. And what came out of that RED II directive is that according to that scheme, and that we're speaking about a principle called ILUC. You have high ILUC and low ILUC. But again, to cut the long story short, is that because of that directive, there would be possibly repercussions on subsidies or financial or fiscal benefits that could be received. So Again, not at all an issue of market access. Indonesia can export, or Malaysia or Colombia or some of the other palm oil producers, as much palm oil as it would want. And if you look at the statistics, well, of course, now we have all been hit by COVID-19, so there is an effect on all exports from all over the world, but you will see that there is still a very, very substantial export towards the European Union market from Indonesia. And then again, I can't say much about the WTO case as such, but as I tried to say, we have as a policy to respect the rules and the outcomes of the WTO and the WTO dispute settlement system. On the second question, EU and ASEAN, you're absolutely right that very different organizations, very different in its ultimate objective. The treaty used to say that the European Union treaty that the EU is an ever closer union, so that we would always get closer and closer and closer together. So the ultimate objective of the EU is very different than that of ASEAN, which is, as you said, very much based on consensus and very intergovernmental. And here, colleagues from the different ASEAN embassies always point out the fact that ASEAN is a very, compared to the EU, very heterogeneous organizations with some are democracies, some are less, some are there's different religions. There's also different levels of economic development. So it's much more difficult in different areas to find actually possibly common ground. But I think despite the fact that the European Union and ASEAN are so different, we do see that on many issues we do think alike. ASEAN, just like the EU, is based on multilateralism. It's based on the fact that we need global cooperation to tackle the big challenges of today. ASEAN, such as the EU, took some decisions in the light of COVID-19 which were very similar. For example, how to set up a regional stockpile of personal protective equipment, or how to make sure that we maintain our supply chains within the region, how to ensure economic growth when the virus has basically knocked out a number of GDP points. So while our decision-making, our procedures, and even our ultimate objective of integration is different, we do see eye to eye on the substance. So that allows it allows us to find a good space for dialogue on substance, and that's why we have over 20 different dialogues. We have a huge cooperation agenda as well. So I think I'll stop here so we can have some more questions should you wish so.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. Now we're opening the second batch of questions. All right, we have one question from UNPAD, Glenn Matthew.
Okay, good afternoon, Ambassador. Thank you for the time. So I want to ask one question. So I heard that one of EU interests is security. And so we know that there's in Asian, there is one ongoing issues regarding South China Sea that involves several Asian nations. So I want to ask, what's EU gonna do for Asian? And the second one is, does EU have a solution to resolve this issue? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. For the next questions, we've had questions from UNPAD. How about questions from UNPAR or Unjani? Anyone want to raise their hand for the second batch? All right. Okay, we have two questions from Unjani Rama Darujati.
Okay, good afternoon for our host today. And my name is Ramadhan Rujati from Unjani. I want to ask a question about about European Union focus on ASEAN. Uh, as as I see from previous presentation that European Union trying to approach Southeast Asia countries, but since ASEAN have the consensus itself, it's kind of hard to make all the ASEAN members to agree with the agreements. So does European Union have the focus to approach the ASEAN as associations or Southeast Asia as a country? So it is it it is the focus is on the region or the multilateral itself? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rama. And lastly, for this batch, from UNPAR, Azra Shafa Andira.
Good afternoon, all the participants and Mr. Ambassador. My name is Azra Fandira, representing Parahyangan Catholic University. I would like to propose two questions. The first one is regarding the security. As we all have known of South China Sea, which involves the UNCLOS, as we've seen, there is pivoting currently occurring from the Philippines, which differs between the first one is previously under the leadership of Benigno Aquino, they are actually very against we would say the actions that China committed, but under the presidential leadership of Mr. Duterte, there is actually a pivoting from oppositive to pretty affirmative. Do you think this action will eventually affect other stakeholders involved in the dispute itself? And for the second question, it is actually regarding the trade. For the goals of setting economic path integration, do you think are there any other stakeholders outside the EU involved into setting up this goal? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll hand the floor back over to Ambassador Driesmans.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, on the South China Sea, and I'll try to combine the answer to the two questions. But maybe let me say that I won't put myself in the shoe of the government of the Philippines or of any other country, but I'd like to just point out this when it comes to how we see the situation in South China Sea. The first point is that we do not ourselves take sides on the different claims in the South China Sea. We do not say, well, according to us, this part should be there, this part belong to that one. Secondly, we do, however, respect, as I tried to point out, international law, and especially the international law of the sea and the convention related to the law of the sea. And it also means that when there is an award that is issued under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, for example, the 2016 award of the Philippines versus China, that we want that award to be implemented and respected by all parties. That's number two. Number three is that we have called out some of the land reclamations which we have seen in the South China Sea, and some of the unilateral and sometimes even aggressive behavior by some in the South China Sea. And we think that is an issue of concern for the EU, as it should be for everybody. You know that the South China Sea is a very dense transport route, maritime transport route. What is it? 1/3, I think, of international maritime transport or more goes through the South China Sea. So it's important not just to us in security terms, but also to us in trade terms and in business terms, that there is freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, and that is not compatible with some of the concerns that I have been mentioning. The second question was on our focus between the region and the countries, if I got the question right. And I think the answer is that we work both individually with each ASEAN country, as well as with the region and with ASEAN as a whole. Now, it is true that with some countries, we sometimes have disagreements, as every relation with between each country has ups and downs and sometimes disagreements. But at the end of the day, we think that sometimes those bilateral issues which we might have between the European Union and one or the other ASEAN country should not stand in the way of a very good and positive EU-ASEAN partnership, because we have so much in common, so much we share. And as I said, most notably, our joint wish to abide by the principles of multilateralism, international rule of law, and a cooperative global order. We don't like unilateralism. We don't like spheres of influence with one country trying to control another. Those are all very fundamental things that between the European Union and ASEAN we share. And in a time when some go increasingly unilateral, some go increasingly protectionist, the European Union and ASEAN are two organizations, two blocks, so to speak, who should, shoulder the responsibility of trying to keep up the multilateral global system, which is I admit, not easy these days. The last question was on trade. Now, I think that in terms of our concrete cooperation with ASEAN through the project I mentioned, Arise Plus, we're one of the only partners, if not the only one, who actually financially support ASEAN in that way. But what I'd like to point out is that we do not set these goals ourselves as the European Union. What we do is we work with ASEAN on the basis of their blueprint, on the basis of the ASEAN Economic Community and the goals that were set by ASEAN for itself, and how we, with our experience, can contribute to achieve those goals, be it on the standard setting, be it on the elimination of market barriers, but also non-tariff barriers. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is an actual increase in non-tariff barriers amongst ASEAN countries. Now, again, there we try to share with ASEAN our experience and try to support them where we can. But these are very much the ASEAN objective, the ASEAN goals, as enshrined in the ASEAN Economic Community. I'll stop here maybe for now. Go on.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. For the third batch of questions, we'll take the first question from Unpar, from Aurelia and Jenny.
Thank you, host, for the opportunity. Good afternoon, ambassadors and fellow friends. My question is about the future of cooperations between EU and Asia under the pressure of COVID-19. To ambassadors, in your opinion, how ideal EU and Asian cooperations like nowadays, like under the situation of COVID-19? We know that it is sometimes hard to host a conference and stuff, that should be done using online facilities. And in your opinion, how ideal that is? And is that enough to counter the COVID-19? And how should the EU and Asians work together to actually counter the COVID-19? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Aurelia. Our next question is from Unpad, from Muhammad Rafazain.
All right, thank you very much, the host, for this opportunity. First of all, good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Muhammad Rafazain, and I am from Unpad. And my question would be about what action would the EU take should one of its member states perhaps violates one of the values of the EU, in particular Hungary, which recently, around a few months ago, has enacted this sort of state of emergency in their state, in which the government could basically do anything they want, even though it's been voted off by its parliament. But in June, another new law has been introduced in which it allows the government to reenact another state of public health emergency, and again enables the government to do basically anything it wants, therefore violating the EU's principle of rule of law and democracy. I have read several articles and analysis explaining what actions the EU could have taken. For example, maybe evoke Article 7, or perhaps pull away Hungary's funding of the EU. But then I've also read there are several problems to those steps. For example, when it comes to Article 7, for example, Hungary would be backed, for example, by the Czech Republic and Poland and perhaps other countries. And my question would be, should something like this were to happen again, or should, for example, assuming that Hungary still has its state of emergency enabled and perhaps violating the EU's values, what action do you personally think would be appropriate to be taken by the EU? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muhammad Rafazain. And for our third question from Unjani, Muhammad Adam Fadilah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muhammad Adam Fadilah.
Could you move closer to the mic, please? We can't quite hear your voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muhammad Adam Fadilah, and I'm from Unjani. So, as I have seen on slide number 11, that EU values to talk about human rights. So, my question is about what happens in 2012 in Rakhine State, Myanmar. So, I would like to ask about humanitarian crisis, because in Asean itself, the United Nations Security Council ever said that ASEAN have the slow action to finish this problem, to this humanitarian crisis. So I would like to ask from Ambassador of the European Union, is there any solution that you can propose to finish this problem? Because this problem is consequence many problem to the Asian country, to Asian member states, like overpopulation in host country, and especially in this pandemic. So I think that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we actually have 2 more questions lined up, but we'll save that for our next and final batch. So for these 3 questions, I'll hand the floor back over to Ambassador Driesmans.
Thank you very much for these very interesting and engaging questions on cooperation between the European Union and ASEAN on COVID-19. There's actually quite a bit that we do and can do. And I'd like to just point out 4 things. The first is that rather early on in the month of March already, our foreign ministers got together through VTC, our High Representative, whom I mentioned in the presentation, as well as the ASEAN foreign ministers to discuss the situation. And I think it's important that there's kind of this political agreement to tackle this together, and also set a political narrative, which is not the one of playing the blame game, but rather looking at solution. As my High Representative said during that session, the virus is not Chinese to the same extent that the Spanish flu was not Spanish, and he can know it. He is Spanish. So to set that that narrative of global cooperation, science-based, tackle the issues of disinformation, and look for a common solution. So that's number 1. Number 2, we work together on research in different aspects of COVID-19. Everybody automatically thinks about their search for a vaccine, which is of course part of it, but there's much more to COVID-19 research. For example, when it comes to modeling, we put at the disposal of some ASEAN research institutes our high-speed computer modeling, but also in terms of treatments and so on. Thirdly is the issue of excuse me, supply chains. We need to ensure that essential goods flow globally, as well as within our different regional organizations. That's an objective that we share with ASEAN. You don't want medicines or food or other essential goods to be stuck in different countries and not be able to be transported to other sides of the country, or indeed to neighboring countries. So also here, through some of our financial instruments, such as Rise Plus, we are trying to help. 4th point and last point, it's not at the level of ASEAN, but at the level of the different ASEAN countries. We have made available a very sizable amount of money, over 800 million euro, to help ASEAN countries deal with COVID-19. And that is dealing with health emergencies, dealing with health issues in somewhat the longer term. That means giving job security to some, boosting the economic recovery, for example, in the garment sector in Myanmar. So a very comprehensive set of financial support programs that we have rolled out in ASEAN, and indeed unmatched by any other partner in the world. The second question was the easy one from Mr. Mohammed on the rule of law. I think theoretically there are indeed two possible instruments. One is triggering Article 7, which everything that entails. And the second one is the link between the rule of law and some of the financial support programs that European Union member states benefit from. And on this second account, I would advise you to read the conclusions of the last European Union summit, which basically states that as of now, for the next multi-annual financial framework, which is the next 7 years, that there will be a decision made in the Council as to how to link that financing with the application and the respect of the rule of law. And I would point out that that is to be taken by qualified majority in the Council, maybe also addressing some of the other issues that you mentioned. Now, the last question on the situation in the Rakhine State. I think we have been very vocal since the start of the crisis, laying out our concerns with what has happened there. I myself was able to visit Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh together with my boss at the time, the previous representative, and to visit Myanmar to discuss some of these issues. I think our position on what has happened is very clear, and we have and continue to express our concerns about the discrimination that we see happening, some of the atrocities that have happened in Rakhine State. We've also enacted specific, very targeted sanctions on key people in, for example, the Myanmar military establishment. And of course, we think that the perpetrators should be brought to justice. And in this respect, we follow very closely what is happening in The Hague with the ICC ruling. Now, I think it's very difficult for me to point out a solution. I think if there were a magical solution, somebody would have found it. But I think sitting here from Jakarta as ambassador to ASEAN, I do hope that we can work closely with ASEAN as a regional organization. We've noted some of the statements made by the foreign ministers of ASEAN on what's happening in Rakhine State when they met in January. For example, the setting up of the support team to the work in Rakhine. And I think we're more than happy to work very constructively with ASEAN to pursue the goals which we share with them. Work on the ground to continue to provide humanitarian support, project support, but also trying to address some of the structural issues which are still at the heart of the problem. Cindy?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And for our last batch, we'll take the first question. We had a question earlier from Umar Haq. Would you still like to ask your question? Search. From Umar? There you go. I'm sorry, we can't quite hear you. Could you speak closer to the mic? Or I think there may be a problem with your headphones. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to know about what's your opinion on the ongoing issue of the rising sense of nationalism and protectionism, and as well as the anti-immigrant sentiments in Europe, which threatens the unity and solidarity of the EU, such as in France, in Poland, Germany, in Hungary, in Greece, where right-wing politicians are promoting the sense of anti-immigration laws, protectionism, and also even urging to leave the EU, such as in France, where they are planning to have a Frexit, such as in Brexit. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Umar. Our second question from UNPAD, Aulia Fati.
Okay, thank you for the time. My name is Aulia from University of Asean. I'd like to ask a question about the COVID-19 situation that has been going on right now. What do you think personally, what kind of policy in EU that has been implemented and proven most effective that could also be well implemented in Asian, especially in Asian countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Aulia. And for our final question from UNPAR, we have Ignatius Satria Widisono.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I want to ask perhaps a simple question, continuing on a previous question on COVID. As you have said earlier, the EU has instituted a regional financial help system that could be used by any of its members. In your opinion, Mr. Ambassador, is such financial help, regional financial help, is ASEAN? Using your experience, what your diplomatic years here in ASEAN, is ASEAN ready for such a regional financial help to take place to combat this COVID-19 situation? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ambassador, we have two more questions from students that are lined up. Would you be willing to take them for this final batch?
Go ahead.
All right. So from UNPAR, Maulana Rahman Al-Fatah.
Okay, thank you for the time. My name is Maulana Rahman, and I would like to ask about your opinion, Mr. Ambassador. Based on the security perspective, I would like to ask you, what is the EU response with the conflict that just happened in Mali about 3 years ago? And what is the role of EU for ASEAN if a conflict like this happens again in the future? Thank you.
Sorry, which conflict were you talking about?
Marawi, that just happened in Filipina about 3 years ago.
All right. And for our last question from UNPAD, Harold Yahaskiel.
Okay, thank you. To Ambassador, I have thank you for opportunity. My name is Harold from UNPAD. I have one question accordance of pandemic era. During the pandemic era, we have encountered many difficulties as an impact of COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in economic sectors, in trade and investment. What is the most essential European Union have done in cooperation with ASEAN in supporting and mitigate our economic activities from impact?
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll hand the floor back over to Ambassador Driesmans.
Thank you very much. The first question on nationalism and protectionism. I think the first thing I'd say is that the rise of nationalism and protectionism are basically not just a European issue, but something that you see across the world, from Latin America to Africa to Asia. In many countries, you see a rise of nationalism and protectionism. There's a lot of literature on that, which unfortunately I don't always have the time to read, but I think there's a certain consensus that is somehow linked to the insecurities brought about by economic globalization and some of the inequalities that have been brought to the fore because of globalization. So nationalism and economic protectionism bring for some sometimes false illusion of security in say on terms, and the European Union and different member states are indeed no exception to that. Now, I think what governments should do and have done, I think, in the European Union is respond with facts, not with populism, listening to the concerns that are sometimes rightfully expressed, for example, on the issue of inequality, but also be very clear-eyed and facts-based when it comes to formulating a policy response. And I think if you see over the last couple of years, the support to the European Union has actually increased according to all opinion polls since the decision by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. So a sense that it is important to think about the benefits brought about by European integration, especially if you see the difficulties involved in leaving. And I think that was also very visible in the last elections from the European Parliament, which many were saying, or some in the opinion polls were saying, that there would be a blocking minority of nationalists and populists. That was not the case. On the contrary, there is a very solid majority, again, within the European Parliament, elected just less than a year ago, of moderates and pro integration parties. On the issue of COVID, now I don't think that we have a miracle treatment or miracle drug or vaccine. So in that sense, there's not, at least at this stage, we of course are in the middle of the research towards a vaccine, and there's a number of very promising tests that are currently being conducted. But I think for the time being, there is no such vaccine, and also no treatment that has proved to be a lifesaver, so to speak. So in that sense, I don't think there is something that we could share. Also, to the other question, we don't have regional financial health systems. There is no at the European Union level a health policy or health system as such. That's very much a national competence. But what we do have is we pulled together, for example, the acquisition of personal protective equipment like masks or other specific medicines or other issues, we compiled that and bought that massively at the European level. So that was having a knock-on effect on the price, which was subsequently very lower. We also decided together to make a European Union stockpile of protective personal equipment. So that's some of the measures that might also be interesting for ASEAN, and I think that's also looking at the conclusions of one of the earlier summits. That is definitely something that ASEAN is also looking at and experience. We are more than happy to share. On the economic front in Europe, there's of course much more that we can do because of a lot of that competence is at the European level. And one I'd maybe just mention is the financial help that we provided at the European level for persons who were temporarily unemployed because of COVID-19. So you have a permanent job, but because of COVID-19, there is no more work for you. Well, on a short-term basis, the European Union was able to, and is still, through some of its programs, able to help in that respect by covering that gap, so that later on you can just find your work back as before. And also avoiding the knock-on effect, which we see in other countries, whereby all of a sudden there's huge, massive unemployment, which then in turn creates an economic crisis. Now, maybe going to the very last question on economic activities on COVID, to stay within that theme. I'm happy to send you a fact sheet which we made of our COVID response and economic response in ASEAN, or if you just look at it on our social media handles, EU and ASEAN, you will also find it. But really, there's in every ASEAN country, our response, our policy response, and our support was different. I gave the example, I think, earlier of support to garment workers in Myanmar or in Cambodia. In other countries, we have decided to give budget support. That's money that we put directly in the state coffers, so as to limit the impact, the negative economic impact. So all of these examples you can find on our social media handles, and I do recommend you look at it. Now, regarding the conflict in the Philippines, we have actually been somewhat behind the scenes, very actively supporting the Mindanao peace process. All the way through the negotiations to the referendum and later on, and we will continue to do so, including sometimes with financial support. Of course, this is an issue for the people of the Philippines to address first and foremost, but as European Union, we're more than ready, and I think able to help, as we have done so for the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, I think we can cut it there. I'm sure everyone has many questions, but unfortunately, we can't take them all because of time constraints. But thank you to all the students for your questions. And also, thank you so much, Ambassador Driesmans, for your insightful and detailed presentation. From the presentation, we can learn the history and the establishment of the European Union, its interests and its values, as well as its multilateralism agenda with the world, and especially with ASEAN. And I hope that the Ambassador's presentation will be beneficial for all the students, and hopefully it will also add to your knowledge on the European Union. Now, before we close, the embassy has actually prepared a fun quiz for us. So if you answer the questions correctly, you will be receiving a goodie bag with cool gifts and prizes from the EU. Now, there are only going to be 3 questions, and they're all multiple choice. So to answer, Please use the raise hand feature and I will choose the first ones that raise their hand. Now let's begin. For the first question, prepare yourself. Number 1, the euro banknotes and coins were launched in 2002. The euro is the most tangible proof of European integration. Around 341 million people use it every day, making it the second most used currency worldwide. The euro is the official currency for 19 of the 27 EU member countries. These 19 EU countries form the euro area, also known as the Eurozone. From the following countries, which one is not yet part of the Eurozone? Is it A, Croatia, B, Cyprus, C, Slovakia, or D, Slovenia? If you know the answer, please raise your hand now, and I'll be choosing the first one that raised their hands. No Googling, so make sure to, all right, okay. First person was Unpar Azra Shafa Andira. What is your answer?
If I'm not mistaken, among the choices are Croatia.
Yes, that's correct. Is that your answer?
Yes.
Is that correct, Ambassador? Correct. Correct answer. Congratulations.
Yay.
Yay. So we'll move on to the next question. Everybody, please lower your hands. All right. Number 2, a Schengen visa is a short stay visa allowing its holder to circulate in the Schengen area without border controls between them. Currently, the Schengen area covers 26 countries. From this 26 Schengen states, how many are EU member states? Is it A, 20, B, 22, C, 24, or D, 26? If you know the answer, please raise your hands. Okay, from Unpar, Marshall Adriani.
If I'm not mistaken, 26.
So 26 out of 26 has the Schengen. Wait. Okay, 26. Sorry, wrong answer. The next person to raise their hand was Umar Hat from Unpad. Is it A, 20, B, 22, or C, 24?
If I'm not mistaken, it's 22.
22, final answer?
Yep.
Are you sure?
Certain.
Okay, correct answer. Congratulations, Umar. Please send us your details and we will send the gifts to you. Now for the last and final questions, number 3, the Presidency of the Council of the EU rotates among the EU member states every 6 months. During the 6-month period, the Presidency chairs meetings at every level in the Council of the EU, helping to ensure the continuity of the EU's work. The question is, which country currently holds the Presidency of the Council of the EU? Is it A, Portugal, B, France, C, Germany, or D, the Netherlands? All right, the first person was from Unpar, Azra Shafa Andira.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it's Germany.
Germany. That is the correct answer. Congratulations. So, wait, you won the first question too, right?
Pardon?
You won the first question as well, right?
Did I? Oh yeah, I guess.
I think we should be able to share the prizes maybe because you won the first question as well. So, all right. Thank you. So we've come to the end of the quiz, and congratulations to the winners. We will be contacting you after this to send you your prizes. Now, before we close, we have a few closing remarks. So may I invite the founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Dr. Dino Patijalal.
Good afternoon, Ambassador Igor, and good afternoon, students. I don't have much to say except just to thank Ambassador Igor for his lecture today, and I'm sure that the students that are following the lecture found it not just interesting, but informative. And I hope you will write essays based on what Ambassador Igor have presented to you. There are a lot of things that he said that would be useful to be expanded as a research essay. And I do want to tell you that Europe remains a critical part of the world and an important partner for Indonesia in terms of our foreign policy agenda. You know, the world now is really in flux, you know, it's kalang kabut, ya. Dan banyak masalah, things are being turned upside down. There's no certain directions. There's a lot of global agendas that are that have the potential to be terbengkalai, you know, not being dealt with properly, right? In particular, climate change, right? Sustainable development agenda, and other issues. And I'm happy to see that Europe remains keenly interested in these global agenda and multilateralism. And on some areas, not all areas, on some areas, the European Union wants to take the lead. And not only that, they have the political will and they have the resources, the diplomatic and economic resources to pursue those agenda, right? So for me as a former diplomat, it's nice to see a grouping of countries that are out there and willing to take some risks and to undertake some degree of leadership, because right now, you know, that leadership is really problematic. You know, the United States now is not exercising that leadership. You know, it's a lot of me first, America first foreign policy, right? And some other countries are busy with other agenda. So it'll be interesting for us to see how far Europe, the European Union, will even move further as a critical partner in the international affairs. And I think the political synergy between Indonesia and EU, being both democracies, are driving them closer together. And I look forward to many more European Union contribution and partnership with Indonesia. So that's all I need to say. Thank you very much, Ambassador Igor, for your thoughts, and we look forward to many more, to hearing many more thoughts from you. Yeah, thank you very much. And let's give a big hand, everybody, to Ambassador Igor. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pak Dino. Now I would like to give the floor back to Ambassador Driesmans for his closing remarks or any message you have for the students.
Well, very briefly, and thank you very much to Dr. Dino. Very kind words from such a distinguished man as yourself. I do appreciate. I mean, it was a pleasure for me to engage here with you today. I hope it was as fun for you as it was for me. I do like to engage with students. I think it's also intellectually challenging to get sometimes a little bit out of the normal bureaucratic diplomatic talk. So I do hope that one day we can do this in person. And to all students, I can only encourage you to pursue a career in international politics or in diplomacy. It's indeed, as Pak Dino said, a challenging time, but it's a very interesting one, and I think it needs good diplomats, and even more so good Indonesian diplomats for the next generation. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with that, we have come to the end of our ambassadorial lecture today. Once again, thank you to His Excellency Ambassador Igor Driesmans for your time, and also to all the students who have joined today. Now, before we end our meeting, I would like to invite everyone to a virtual photo shoot. So please turn on your cameras and smile, and we will take several screenshots. I'll hand the floor to Wahyu.
Okay, so hello everybody. Now let's take a picture. So everybody please turn on your camera if you haven't doing it so. I will count from 1, 2, and 3, and we will do it in maybe 3 batch because there's a lot of people. Okay, so first batch, everybody in 3, 2, and 1. Wait. Again. Everybody in 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Once again. Everybody for the last. In 3, 2, and 1. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador, and also to all the students. We hope to see you in our future events.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And please take a moment to fill in the feedback form in order to improve ourselves in areas. Thank you.